We're here in the exhibition Another Kind of Life, Photography on the Margins, a photographic exhibition that showcases the work of 20 exceptional artists who have been working from the 50s through to the present day. It's part of a season called The Art of Change here at the Barbican, and that season has been celebrated because in this year of 2018 we are celebrating, in Britain at least, women's suffrage, so at the point at which women get the vote. It's an important milestone this century to talk about, especially in light of the context of #MeToo and the Time's Up movement. These are important subjects to be engaging with today. And also it's a moment of reflection, looking back at the modern period where so much has changed and we're still living through a very kind of turbulent political time, whether it's through Brexit, what's happening in the US and kind of more global aspects. So it felt that it was the right time to address head on, and at times directly and at times poetically, ideas of what change can mean. What can it mean within an art centre? What can it mean within the visual arts, and the dialogue between, and reflecting basically between art, society and politics. The exhibition is looking at photographers' kind of endless fascination with documenting, capturing and engaging with individuals and communities who operate on the fringes of society, whether that's because of their gender, because of their sexuality, because of their identity, because they're economically dispossessed, or simply those that have openly flouted social convention from the 50s through to the present. And it's trying to hold a mirror up to society and show a much more fractured society, a more fractured world, where there are many different ways of living, many different ways of existing, and it's looking at these communities and how they foster a sense of belonging, foster a sense of identity, because we all want to come together, we all want to belong somehow. So it's about kind of fostering communities within these societies or communities that have been shunned by larger society. And also we're looking at the role that artists have played within that debate by looking at how artists have helped to bring these communities into a into mainstream, to wider public consciousness, and how that's become part of the kind of cultural and public discourse. So the exhibition starts very resolutely in the 1950s, in the post-war period. That marks a moment in photographic history when the editorial grip on photography begins to waver and is replaced by a more personal and subjective approach to photography, meaning that artists are going out into the world and making work on their own accord. They're not being sent on assignment. They're going out in the world and trying to make sense of the world around them through the lens. And so that marks a very particular moment. It marks a moment when a different type of journalism begins to emerge, a more what we call new journalism. So this more, it has a literary equivalent as well within journalism, but it's about trying to break out of the rules and conventions and the strictures of strict social documentary photography. Because of course there are many precedents. There were lots of bodies of work made in the 30s and 40s also looking at these subjects, but these are artists who see themselves to a certain degree as outsiders. Chris Steele-Perkins is a British social documentarian. He is a member of Magnum Photos, and he has a long history of making important, in-depth studies of life in Britain in particular. In the mid-1970s, he was commissioned to go and photograph the third wave of the Teddy Boys, which was this very unique British subcultural phenomenon that spanned generations. There was grandfathers and young children. It was intergenerational, which was unusual in a subculture to kind of harness and engage different generations.
I like to think of myself as an outsider with it. You know, the things that interest me as a photographer, the things that I don't know about. So there's a way of exploring the world for me. I mean, photography is fantastic. It opens all these doors and you kind of get in because you're a photographer and then right in the situation. So for me, that's a good position to be in, a slight distance that you're not sucked up and drawn into it and lose yourself, but you're in control, but you're observing as well. I don't know who these guys are, you know, every bank holiday, the tents would go down to Southend, or the southern tents would go to Southend, which is a small seaside town, and go and jump on the rides and go on the dodging cars and shout at people and yeah, just have a good time. So, you know, this was a couple, brothers, I guess, and I just saw them and thought, hey, this looks kind of weird because they look so much like each other. And put them up against a wall and took about 3 frames, and that was it. And this guy, I followed up on this actually. He's Freddie Fingers Lee. He's a great pianist, and he would play literally the whole set upside down like this on the piano. And then I saw him about 20 years later, and he was up in Newcastle. He was a Geordie, and he was running a sort of sound studio, and he made money selling CDs that he continued to make to European fans. So, you know, some of the lifetime that these people have as TEDs was quite extended. It was, you know, 20 years ago you meet up and they're still involved in the TED business, as it were.
It almost seems effortless how you play with blood. Human mind walked the fields where the pride did not stride. I ran through the gates of ammunition land, trying to find a log under heavy fire. So I warn you, my friend, don't play with guns.
The show starts in the late 50s and goes all the way through to the present day. It spans a very broad international sweep. The show starts in America, but we include bodies of work from Japan, from Latin America, Mexico and Chile, from the South African photographer Pieter Hugo photographing in Nigeria, and there are bodies of work from India by Dayanita Singh. So there's a really broad range because, of course, the margins is not something that's particular to any particular country, but it has an international context, and we wanted to show how these groups are being photographed, how they're represented, the adversities that they need to overcome in their daily lives across the world, and how that has changed across time and space. So the issues that some of these subjects and communities are facing in the 50s are very different to the experience of transgender sex workers, for instance, in Mexico in 2016. It's about giving a voice, but ultimately what connects all of these bodies of work together is the sustained engagement between the photographer and the community. So in many cases, the artists have forged very meaningful personal relationships with these communities. So I think of Bruce Davidson, who's an early example, who in 1958 and in 1959 made 2 seminal bodies of work. One was looking at Jimmy Armstrong, who was known as Little Man, who was a clown, a person of short stature in a circus in New Jersey in 1958. And Bruce Davidson goes on the road. He has this immersive quality to it. He lives with this circus on the road with them, trying to understand, trying to break through, to kind of see beyond the facade and spend time with them, seeing how they eat, how they drink. You know, you get every facet. They were trying to show us the underbelly, the gritty side of these worlds. Got work by Dido Moriyama, who's working slightly later in the 60s. He was a self-taught photographer, and he has a very interesting approach because he has a particular relationship, not necessarily with the individuals in his photographs, but with a place. He has a particular relationship with Shinjuku in downtown Tokyo, and that has been his canvas, his kind of his muse, if you will, over the last 50 years. He prowls the narrow, dark streets, looking for those characters, those individuals who also occupy this kind of netherland, this underbelly of Tokyo. And it's at a time when, of course, Japan is undergoing increasing westernization of its culture. It's against the backdrop of the Vietnam War, American occupation, And so this tussle between modernity and tradition begins to emerge. Photographically, Dido Murayama has a very interesting approach. He's in pursuit of reality. His photographs are grainy, out of focus, raw, and they're full of energy. They're alive. They feel incredibly dynamic. And he photographs those members, whether it's bar girls, street workers. So there are a whole different range of stories. More contemporary work. We're also showing the work of Casa Susana, which is a little-known collection, prints that were found in 2004 in a New York flea market by two antique dealers. It's an incredibly important visual record of a burgeoning transgender community in America in the 1950s and 60s, at a time when some of them were heterosexual men, some later identified as transgender women, but it shows a visual record of this community and how they affirmed their own identity and how important photography was, how instrumental it was in helping them to affirm their identity. They took photographs of themselves, they exchanged them, they were published in a very important bi-monthly periodical called Transvestia, which was written for and by the burgeoning transgender community. So it's an important historical record about a group of individuals within society who didn't have a place because they were existing in a world in which we only recognise two genders, and in actual fact what we're saying is there are many more colours of gender than we can possibly imagine, and this stands as an important visual record of that moment, and they stand defiantly and proud. The photographers' role, so their role has really been to work in collaboration, in participation. So some of the photographers, such as Larry Clark or Danny Lyon, were personal participants. It's an autobiographical body of work. So Danny Lyon in 1964 joined the Chicago Outlaws Motorcycle Club. He bought a Triumph motorcycle, all the spare parts, and built his, and went onto the open road and travelled in this kind of subversive moment against mainstream society with this biker gang. And so he's recording his own daily life, what he was up to. And equally with Larry Clark in the 60s, he's photographing his kind of, high school friends, Billy Mann and David Roper, as they kind of descend into this kind of spiraling vortex of sex, drugs and violence. But that was his world. He was a deeply embedded participant within that world. So some of the artists have had a very autobiographical role in the work that we're showing. Other artists have had a different type of engagement. So for instance, Paz Zarazares, who's worked of transgender sex workers in Chile in the 80s, she had a different approach. She went and she befriended this transgender community, and in order to gain their trust, she goes and lives on and off in these clandestine brothels with them, because it's only by gaining intimacy and trust between this kind of photographic exchange can these photographs happen, in order to get access to their most kind of vulnerable moments. So in all levels, all of these photographers have, whether it's Marianne and Mark's engagement with Tiny over the 3 decades, or Dianita Singh's engagement with Mona Ahmed, an Indian eunuch. But she's not in, in case of Dianita Singh, she was sent on commission by the Times in London in 1989. She met Mona and they became lifelong friends until Mona passed away in 2017. And it's a very personal connection between these two unique individuals that we are being, and the fact that she's a eunuch is almost irrelevant to this beautiful story that Dianita Singh chronicles through her film and through her book. And so each one has, a very different starting point, a different approach, a different photographic approach. Some of them are social documentary, some are more vernacular, some are more street photography. But underlying everything is the sustained engagement with the communities.